Sit back as we drift over to the early Cenozoic era, 66 million years ago. This was a period of renewal, following the immense destruction that wiped out the age of the dinosaurs. A great terrestrial reset, where giant lizards no longer dominated the land, leaving space for our small, skittish, and mostly nocturnal ancestors to come out of their niche and take over the planet. What was life like for our mammal ancestors? The 10 million years succeeding the end of the dinosaurs came to be known as the mammalian explosion, a time where mammals evolved into an amazing, vast, and surprising array of different species. From water-dwelling, tree-dwelling, land-grazing, all the way to flying, the age of the mammals had only just begun. During the reign of the dinosaurs, mammals carved out small existences as shrew, mouse, and squirrel-like creatures, surviving in the underbrush, broken trees, and hidden places of the world, ever avoiding the giants above them. If you were a mammal back then, you would assume you and your kin would forever stay at the bottom of the food chain, never able to traverse the world at your leisure. You definitely would never have imagined that your distant descendants would go on to inherit the world and achieve wonders. Life has a funny way of moving in directions you wouldn't predict. Our Earth has always been a fan of hard resets followed by exponential growth. Let's now follow along and understand what life was like for these little mammals emerging into a brand new world. To set the scene properly, picture the moment just after the curtain falls on the dinosaurs. The great impact has already happened. The sky has darkened, the climate has lurched and stumbled, and many of the once familiar sounds have gone quiet. No more ground-shaking footsteps of enormous sauropods, no more echoing calls of giant predators. The forests are scorched and broken in places. The air still carries the memory of smoke and dust, and yet, underneath fallen trunks and inside burrows, there is movement. These are the survivors. Small, warm-bodied, nervous little creatures that spent millions of years living in the shadows of giants. They did not win by being stronger or more impressive. They won by being adaptable, by hiding, by eating almost anything they could find. They were the sort of animals that would raid a nest, nibble roots, snack on beetles, and then vanish back into the dark before anything noticed. Not glamorous, but very effective. If you imagine yourself in their place, your world would feel tight and close. Your life would happen mostly at night, under a sky that sometimes still looks hazy from the aftermath, in forests that are slowly stitching themselves back together. You would navigate by smell and sound more than by sight, every rustle a possible threat, every scent a hint of food or danger. The idea of confidently walking across an open clearing in daylight would seem almost rude. Yet outside your little tunnel or nest, something incredible is happening. With the dinosaurs gone, entire ecological roles are suddenly empty. There are no giant plant eaters stripping the trees bare, no towering predators dominating the food chain. Nature does not like empty spaces. Wherever there is a gap, something will eventually grow to fill it. Our mammal ancestors just happened to be in the right place, with the right toolkit, at the right time. Over the next few million years, these small forms will begin to experiment. Some will grow slightly larger and try out life in the trees, climbing higher to reach fruits and insects. Others will dig deeper into the ground, turning burrowing into an art form. Some will begin to explore open areas, nibbling on new kinds of plants that spring up in the changing climate. There will even be a few bold ones that take a liking to water, paddling around in ancient lakes and rivers. In this episode, we will gently follow them through that transformation. We will look at the world they inherited after the dinosaurs, the bodies they lived in, the dangers they faced, and the strange, warm greenhouse earth that shaped them. So, settle in. Imagine the feeling of curling up in leaf litter at the base of a tree, small heartbeat racing in a very large world, completely unaware that one day your descendants will be building cities, writing books, and listening to long-form podcasts about your life. Our story begins in the quiet cautious footsteps of these tiny survivors, taking their first tentative steps into a world that has finally made room for them. Chapter 2. The day after the end. Let's drift back to that first strange morning after the end of the dinosaurs. Not literally the next sunrise, because the sky was not in the mood for sunrises just yet, but in the early years and centuries that followed. The great impact has already struck. Somewhere on what will one day become the Yucatan Peninsula, a huge asteroid has slammed into the Earth with enough force to ruin every future holiday resort in the blast radius. The shockwave has raced around the globe. Forests have toppled, tsunamis have rolled across coastlines, and clouds of dust and ash have been thrown high into the atmosphere. If you are imagining bright, fiery chaos, hold that image, then slowly turn the brightness down. In the years that followed, the world slipped into a dim, muted state. Dust and aerosols in the upper atmosphere blocked much of the sunlight. Days felt more like extended twilight, and nights were even colder than usual. Photosynthesis struggled, plants withered, food chains that depended on lush vegetation began to snap, one link at a time. For the great dinosaurs, this was a disaster they could not adapt to quickly enough. Large bodies need a lot of energy. When plants die off, herbivores starve, and when herbivores starve, there is not much left for the meat eaters either. In a relatively short geological time, the once thunderous presence of T-Rex, Triceratops, and their cousins faded away. The earth became quieter, but quiet does not mean empty. While the giants faltered, life continued in the cracks and shadows, deep in burrows, under fallen logs, inside the tangled roots of half-dead trees. Small mammals went about the serious business of survival. They had no idea that an entire era had just ended. They were simply doing what they had always done: eating, hiding, breeding, and trying not to become someone else's dinner. If you picture yourself as one of these early mammals, your world is small but intense. You might be about the size of a rat, perhaps smaller, with soft fur for insulation and a fast metabolism to keep you warm. Your heart beats quickly. Your life expectancy is not impressive. Everything you do is urgent because danger never takes a day off. The broken world above you changes the rules in your favor, just a little. Many of the large predators are gone. The forests are more open, littered with charred trunks and fallen branches. There are new hiding places, new pathways, new little pockets of opportunity. Insects that feed on dead wood and decaying plants become abundant. Seeds and roots are still there if you know where to look. If you are small, flexible, and not too picky about your meals, this is your time. One of the great advantages our mammal ancestors had was their ability to stay active in cooler, darker conditions. Being warm-blooded is expensive, but it means you are not fully at the mercy of the sun. While reptiles and other cold-blooded creatures became sluggish in the chill and gloom, mammals could keep moving, searching, digging, and scavenging. Their large eyes and keen hearing made them excellent night workers. Their sense of smell guided them through a world that often looked more like a shadow than a landscape. It is also worth pointing out that mammals were used to living under pressure. Even before the impact, they spent millions of years dodging dinosaur footsteps and sharp teeth. Their entire lifestyle was built around staying small, quiet, and alert. The apocalypse was terrible, but in a strange way, they were already trained for crisis mode. As the years turned into centuries, the atmosphere slowly cleared, dust settled, sunlight began to return with more consistency. The plants that managed to survive, or whose seeds lay dormant in the soil, started to recolonize the land. Pioneer species grew in open spaces, grasses and small shrubs first, then gradually more complex plant communities. With every fresh leaf that unfurled, new food returned to the base of the food web. Insects recovered and diversified, feeding on the regrowing vegetation. Birds, descended from the only dinosaurs who made it through, fluttered and called in the new forests. Reptiles and amphibians crept back into their niches. And in the middle of all this slow rebuilding, the mammals did something very simple and very powerful. They kept having babies. lots of babies. High reproduction rates meant that mammal populations could expand quickly when conditions improved. Each generation also brought small genetic variations. Some had slightly stronger limbs, some were better climbers, some were more curious, some more cautious. In a changing world, these small differences made the difference between surviving and being quietly edited out of history. Over thousands and millions of years, these tiny advantages added up. The mammals that could climb a little higher began to explore the lower branches of trees. Those that were better at digging carved deeper, safer burrows. Some grew slightly larger bodies that allowed them to range further for food. Others specialized in particular diets, like seeds, insects, or even the eggs of less careful neighbors. The broken world of the early Cenozoic slowly transformed into a patchwork of new habitats. Open woodlands, regrowing forests, riverbanks crowded with fresh plant life, and lakes rich with algae and small creatures. Wherever you looked, there was a niche waiting to be claimed. If you imagine drifting above this recovering landscape, watching from a gentle bird's eye view, you would not yet see elephants, whales, or humans. You would see a scurrying, squeaking, rustling world of small mammals in constant motion. The planet is no longer ruled by a handful of giant species. Instead, it is a mosaic of many little experiments. That is perhaps the most important thing about this chapter of Earth's history. It was not about one dramatic new creature stepping up to replace the dinosaurs in a single moment. It was about thousands of small, nervous, adaptable animals spreading into the gaps left behind. They did not inherit the world by winning a single battle. They inherited it by quietly showing up, night after night, generation after generation, until one day they were everywhere. As the early Cenozoic unfolds, this quiet persistence turns into something spectacular. Our anxious, nocturnal ancestors will soon begin to branch out into forms that live in trees, swim in rivers, graze on open plains, and even glide through the air. But before we get to the full mammalian explosion, it helps to keep this image in mind. A darkened, recovering Earth, and in its undergrowth, thousands of small hearts beating, each one a tiny, determined promise that life is not done yet. In the next chapter, we will zoom in even closer and explore what it actually felt like to be one of these early mammals. The senses, the body, the daily routines, and the constant balancing act between fear and opportunity in a world that had just been reset. Chapter 3. Tiny bodies, big senses. Now that we have set the scene of a broken but recovering world, let us shrink ourselves right down and see it from ground level. Instead of drifting peacefully above the forests, imagine that you are no taller than a modern mouse. The world is suddenly huge. Every fallen branch is a wall, every clump of ferns a potential city, and every sound carries a little bit of danger with it. You wake in darkness, not the deep, absolute darkness of a cave, but the quiet, filtered kind that seeps through layers of leaves and soil. You are curled in a nest of plant fibers and fur, tucked into a burrow or hollow space beneath a root. Your small body is warm, held steady by a fast metabolism that never really rests. Your heart beats quickly, steady and insistent. Before you even open your eyes, you are already listening. Sound is one of your biggest lifelines. Somewhere above, something shifts in the vegetation. A quiet rasp, a soft crunch, the flutter of wings. Your brain has been trained, over millions of generations, to sort those sounds into categories: threat, food, or background noise. A distant rumble might be the creak of a half-fallen tree. A series of tiny snaps might be an insect moving through dry leaves. A sudden, sharp crack might be a predator's foot on a twig. You do not have the luxury of ignoring any of it. You sniff the air and the world becomes even clearer. Your sense of smell paints a detailed map that your eyes could never manage on their own. Each scent carries a story. Damp earth means the soil is still holding last night's moisture. The rich, almost sweet smell of decaying wood tells you there may be beetle larvae to eat. The faint, sharp scent of another mammal nearby warns you that this tunnel might already be claimed. Although your size makes you vulnerable, it also lets you access a scale of detail that larger animals never notice. To a giant dinosaur, a forest was simply a path to walk through or a place to find big mouthfuls of leaves. To you, the forest is a layered puzzle. Every root, every mushroom, every broken twig is either a hiding place, a route of escape, a snack, or a warning sign. Your eyes are well adapted to low light. The post-impact world has already started to brighten, but you still prefer the safety of dusk and night. In the dim glow of early evening, your enlarged pupils gather what little light is available. Moving shadows become more visible than fixed shapes. You do not need to see fine details. You just need to detect motion and contrast quickly enough to react. Fur covers your body, thin but efficient. It shields you from sudden drops in temperature and allows you to stay active when the air grows cooler. Unlike reptiles, you do not have to wait for the sun to warm you each morning. Your own internal heat keeps you moving, thinking, and searching, even when the night air bites a little. Of course, there's a cost to this. You're always hungry. Your body constantly burns energy, so you cannot afford long fasts or lazy days. Nature has basically given you a tiny, slightly anxious furnace and then told you to feed it non-stop. You emerge from your shelter cautiously, nose first. The forest floor is cluttered with fallen branches, leaves, ash-stained soil, and sprouting plants. You move low and close to the ground, whiskers brushing against surfaces as you go. Those whiskers are not just decorative. They are finely tuned sensors that help you navigate tight spaces and detect nearby obstacles. In a world where you could be snatched up at any moment, knowing exactly where the next hole or crack is matters a great deal. Food is both a distraction and a necessity. Insects are everywhere if you know how to look. A log that seems uninteresting from the outside might be hollowed out with tunnels, filled with soft grubs and beetles. Seeds that have fallen from pioneering plants provide bursts of energy-rich nutrition. Roots and tubers offer slow, steady calories if you are willing to dig. You do not have a specialized diet yet. You are an opportunist, happy to nibble almost anything remotely edible. This flexibility is one of your greatest strengths. As you forage, your brain is doing something quite sophisticated. For a small animal, a mammal's brain is relatively large compared to its body. You are constantly learning and updating mental maps of your surroundings. That oddly shaped rock, that forked root, that patch of moss with a strange smell. All of these become landmarks in your internal navigation system. Each successful escape route is saved for later. Each place where you once found food is marked in memory. There is also a social side to your life, even if it is not as dramatic as a troop of modern monkeys. You may share a nest with siblings or mates. You may recognize the scent of related individuals and be slightly more tolerant of them than of strangers. Your young, if you are a breeding female, are born small and helpless, dependent on your milk and warmth. That care, that investment in fewer but more developed offspring, is another key mammalian trait. It means fewer babies at a time, but each one has a better chance of survival. Parenting, in your world, is a serious full-time job. You must find food, avoid predators, and still make time to return to the nest and keep your young fed and warm. Every day you successfully repeat this cycle, you extend your genetic story a little further into the future. You are not aware of this in any conscious way, of course. You are simply following instincts honed over unimaginable stretches of time. The dangers around you are real and constant. Large predatory birds patrol the skies, scanning the ground for movement. Surviving reptiles lurk near water sources, waiting for something small and careless to come too close. Even other mammals may see you as competition or a meal. Your best defense is awareness and speed. Freeze when you hear a sudden sound. Bolt for cover when a shadow crosses overhead. Choose routes that keep you close to roots, rocks, and burrows, never lingering in the open longer than necessary. Yet it is not all pure stress and adrenaline. There are brief moments of comfort and rest. times when your stomach is full, your fur is clean, and the world around you feels temporarily quiet. You might spend a few minutes grooming yourself or a nestmate, reinforcing social bonds as you remove parasites and smooth your coat. You may sit at the entrance of your burrow, whiskers twitching, and simply listen to the soft background hum of the forest, wind in the leaves, insects buzzing, the very distant call of a bird that is too far away to worry about. In those moments, you are not thinking about lineage or epochs or what your kind will eventually become. You are just existing, as comfortably as the circumstances allow. It is easy for us, millions of years later, to view these early mammals only as stepping stones to bigger, more recognizable creatures. However, for them, their lives were complete in themselves. They experienced fear, relief, hunger, satiation, moments of safety, and moments of alarm. Their world was as vivid to them as ours is to us. From the outside, a paleontologist might describe you simply as a small, insectivorous mammal of the early Cenozoic, with certain dental patterns and limb proportions. That is technically accurate, but it leaves out the most important part. You were a living, breathing animal moving through a complex landscape with an impressive set of sensory tools and a brain constantly integrating information. In other words, you were already very good at being a mammal. These skills, this fine-tuned sensitivity to the environment, are what allowed your descendants to push further into new habitats when the time came. The same big eyes and agile bodies that kept you safe at night would later be adapted for life in trees. The same curious nose that tracked insects through the undergrowth would one day smell salt spray near an ocean shore, or flowers in a clearing, or the scent trails of other mammals in a forest canopy. For now, though, your world remains close to the ground, within a small radius of your nest. Your night is a repeating cycle of listening, smelling, searching, eating, and hiding. When the sky begins to lighten and the risk of daytime predators grows, you retreat back into the safety of your burrow. You curl up, tail wrapped around your body, young tucked in close, and let your racing heart slow just a little. In this quiet, hidden space, the foundations of our own story are being laid. Every generation that manages to survive and reproduce in this challenging world adds another link in the chain that eventually leads to primates, apes, and humans. It all starts with tiny bodies and big senses, tuned perfectly to a world that was never guaranteed to be kind. In the next chapter, we will zoom back out slightly and watch what happens as these small, adaptable mammals begin to branch into many different forms. The mammalian explosion is about to get creative, and the planet is ready for an astonishing variety of new shapes and lifestyles. Chapter 4. The Mammalian Explosion. We have spent some time close to the ground, inside the life of a single small mammal. Let us now slowly drift the camera back out again. Imagine rising up above the forest floor, past the roots and burrows, past the shrubs and fallen logs, until you can see whole valleys and hillsides at once. What looks like quiet undergrowth from far away is actually the setting for one of the most important transformations in Earth's history. The dinosaurs are gone, the worst of the chaos has passed, and the world is stabilizing. The early Cenozoic is now fully underway. For a few million years, life has been recovering, regrouping, and slowly pushing into the gaps left behind. That is where the fun begins. In the 10 million years or so after the extinction, mammals begin to radiate into a dizzying variety of forms. If the age of the dinosaurs was dominated by a few very large, very dramatic creatures, this new age is characterized by lots and lots of smaller experiments. Evolution is essentially playing a massive round of what if, with mammals as the main contestants. What if you took that little ground-dwelling insect eater and gave it better claws for climbing? What if you stretched another one's body and strengthened its back legs so it could leap between branches? What if you let one line of mammals grow longer snouts and better teeth for chewing tough plants, while another kept sharp, slicing teeth for meat? Across forests, plains, river systems, and coastlines, the same basic mammalian blueprint is being tweaked, stretched, and redecorated in hundreds of different ways. From a distance, the shapes are still relatively modest. We are not yet at the stage of mammoths, rhinoceroses, or whales, the size of buses. But compared to those first shrew-like creatures, the new mammals of the early Cenozoic are starting to show clear differences in size, proportion, and lifestyle. Some remain tiny, clinging to the safety of dense vegetation, while others begin to edge into medium-sized territory. Being a bit bigger allows them to travel further, digest a wider variety of food, and defend themselves more effectively. Of course, being bigger also makes you more visible and more appetizing, so there is always a trade-off. Let us wander slowly through one of these early Cenozoic landscapes. The forest has regrown into a mix of young trees, shrubs, and dense undergrowth. The air is warm and humid, with that familiar smell of soil, leaves, and distant water. The ground is alive with small mammals similar to the one we followed in the last chapter. They rustle through the leaf litter, dig at roots, and dart between patches of cover. As you tilt your gaze upwards, you notice something new. The branches are no longer just quiet perches for birds. They are becoming mammal territory as well. Some mammals have discovered that the three-dimensional maze of the canopy is an excellent place to live. There is food in the form of fruits, leaves, insects, and nectar. There is protection from many ground-based predators. There are pathways that stretch above the forest floor, connecting different parts of the woodland without ever having to touch the ground. Early tree dwellers begin to develop grasping hands and feet, with fingers and toes that can curl properly around branches. Their tails may become longer and more flexible, acting as balancing poles or even as extra limbs in some cases. Their eyes shift slightly forward, improving depth perception, which is extremely handy when missing a branch means an abrupt, personal meeting with gravity. If you imagine one of these early arboreal mammals, its life feels different from that of its ground-dwelling cousins. Its world is vertical as well as horizontal. Every day is a series of climbs, leaps, and careful tests of branch strength. The forest becomes a layered city, with territories not only side by side, but stacked above each other. Back down on the soil, other mammals follow a very different path. Some specialize in digging. Their forelimbs become more powerful, their claws broader and stronger. These burrowers turn the ground itself into a network of tunnels, chambers, and escape routes. They may feed on roots, tubers, insects, or anything else they can find beneath the surface. For them, the forest canopy might as well be another planet. Their world is the cool, dark safety of the soil, where they can vanish quickly if something larger comes along. Elsewhere, in slightly more open areas where forests thin out into woodlands and early grass-covered patches, mammals begin to experiment with life as grazers and browsers. These species start to rely more heavily on plants, particularly leaves and shoots. Their teeth adapt, becoming better suited to grinding vegetation rather than simply snapping insects or crunching seeds. Jaws strengthen, and digestive systems become more complex, able to handle fibrous material. Some of these plant eaters grow larger to accommodate bigger stomachs and longer digestive tracts. Being larger helps them cover more ground and reach higher foliage, but it also means they must constantly move between feeding spots. Their days become slow, steady journeys across the landscape, heads down, ears twitching for any sign of trouble. Where there are plant eaters, there will eventually be serious meat eaters. Early mammalian predators begin to stake out their own niches. At first, many of them are not much bigger than their prey, relying on stealth, surprise, and sharp teeth rather than brute strength. Over time, some lines evolve stronger jaws, more muscular bodies, and better coordination. You may not have iconic big cats yet, but the blueprint is being drafted. Stalking, ambush, pursuit, and pack strategies are starting to appear in rudimentary forms. This is important because it marks a shift in the emotional landscape of life. During the time of the dinosaurs, mammals were mostly the ones being eaten. In this new age, mammals now occupy both sides of that relationship. Some are still prey, some are predators, and some will switch roles depending on who they meet on any given day. Near rivers and lakes, a different experiment is starting. A few mammals find themselves increasingly comfortable around water. They wade along the shallows, pawing at the mud for small fish, crustaceans, or other aquatic snacks. Being in the water offers a slightly different kind of safety. Many land predators are not as effective here, and the cool temperatures can be refreshing in a warm climate. Over many generations, some of these mammals will become more streamlined, with limbs and spines better adapted for swimming. Much later, their descendants will fully embrace the aquatic lifestyle and turn into whales and dolphins. For now, though, they're more like curious, slightly damp generalists. If you shift your attention to the sky at dusk, you may catch glimpses of another remarkable branch of the mammalian family tree. Small, fluttering shapes move against the fading light. These are the very early relatives of bats, mammals that have traded solid ground for the open air. Their limbs have elongated, skin has stretched between their fingers, and they have turned flight into a unique speciality. Flying opens up a whole new universe of feeding opportunities, from catching insects on the wing to sipping nectar from night-blooming flowers. It also provides yet another way of avoiding ground-based predators. As all of these different forms begin to appear, the map of the mammalian world grows more complex. No longer is there a single, typical mammal. Instead, there is a branching web of species, each tailored to its own environment and lifestyle. Tree climbers, burrowers, runners, swimmers, gliders, insect eaters, fruit nibblers, plant grinders, egg thieves, and hunters. From a mathematical perspective, this process is an explosion of possibilities. Once a group survives a major extinction and begins to radiate into new niches, the number of evolutionary pathways multiplies rapidly. Every slight variation that gives even a tiny advantage can, over many generations, produce a new body plan or behavior. It is like starting with a simple character in a game and slowly unlocking an entire skill tree that leads to very different play styles. Emotionally, if we were to anthropomorphize just a little, this era might feel like a giant exhale for mammals. For millions of years, they lived in a narrow band of existence, mostly at night, mostly in hiding, mostly small and constrained. Now, although danger still exists, there is also room to stretch out, experiment, and specialize. Some lineages lean into speed and agility, others into sturdiness and size, and others into intelligence and social complexity. Intelligence, in particular, becomes more and more useful as environments grow varied and interactions with other species become more complicated. Larger brains allow for better memory, more flexible behavior, and more sophisticated social structures. Some mammals begin to live in small groups where cooperation improves their chances of survival. They may share warmth, warn each other of predators, or help raise young. None of this is uniquely human yet, but you can see the outline of future possibilities starting to appear. You can imagine the planet now as a living tapestry, forests that echo with calls, rustles, and footfalls at every level, from canopy to roots. Plains where plant eaters move in loose herds while predators keep their distance, watching for weakness. Wetlands full of splashes and ripples where semi-aquatic mammals hunt, drink, and play. Night skies traced with the darting lines of early bats. All of this diversity emerges from the same basic starting point, those small, warm-bodied survivors who stayed alive when the world fell apart. The mammalian explosion is really just what happens when adaptability meets opportunity. There is empty space in the web of life, and mammals rush in to fill it, not with a single dominating form, but with an entire crowd of them. From our point of view, one of the most important branches of this expanding family will be the primate line, which will eventually give rise to us. But in this chapter of Earth's story, there is no main character yet. Everything is still in flux. No one knows which group will go on to do what. Evolution does not plan ahead. It simply reacts to what works in the moment. For the mammals of this time, life is still about the basics. Find food, avoid becoming food, raise young, explore, repeat. The fact that these simple goals, carried out by millions upon millions of individuals, will eventually lead to cities, science, and long-form relaxation podcasts is quietly hilarious, but it also gives this era a kind of quiet grandeur. In the next chapter, we will narrow our focus again and climb up into the trees with some of the early primate-like mammals. These are the relatives who began to see the world from above the ground, using hands, eyes, and social minds in ways that will one day feel strangely familiar. For now, let the image settle in your mind of a world humming with mammalian activity, every rustle in the leaves a tiny part of the explosion that changed the planet forever. Chapter 5. Life in the Canopy. We have watched the mammals spread across the forest floor, dive into burrows, and push out into open spaces. Now it is time to climb. For this chapter, imagine slowly rising with them into the branches, leaving the leaf litter, roots, and soil behind as you move into a world held up by trunks and limbs of living wood. The early Cenozoic forests are thick and warm. Trees grow close together, their crowns overlapping to form a patchy ceiling of leaves. Sunlight filters through in soft, shifting patterns, painting the branches with dappled light. Vines twist between trunks, moss coats bark, and epiphytes sit in the crooks of branches like little gardens suspended in the air. This is where some of our mammal relatives decide to try something new. Life in the canopy is a very different experience from life on the ground. On the forest floor, you can always count on gravity to stay predictable beneath your feet. Up here, one misjudged step can easily become a very quick lesson in terminal velocity. For mammals that are used to dashing between roots and hiding under logs, this is a big change. Yet the branches offer rewards that the ground cannot match. Up here there are fruits, leaves, flowers, insects, nesting birds, and occasional eggs, all within reach if you are agile enough. There are also fewer large predators. A big carnivore that moves with confidence on soil becomes clumsy among thin branches and tangled vines. If you can master this vertical maze, the canopy becomes both a supermarket and a somewhat safer neighborhood. Imagine yourself as one of these early tree-dwelling mammals, an ancestor of what might one day become primates. You are small, perhaps the size of a modern squirrel, with a body that is light but sturdy. Your limbs are more flexible than those of your ground-living cousins. Your fingers and toes can curl around branches, giving you a firm grip. Your nails may be starting to flatten instead of forming sharp claws, better for grasping than for digging. The first thing you notice about your new home is that it feels less stable than the ground. Branches sway in the wind, leaves rustle and obscure your view, and every route from one tree to another must be tested carefully. You move with 3 points of contact most of the time, keeping at least 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand, connected to the wood. When you leap, you do it with intention, eyes locked on your landing branch, muscles coiled just enough to clear the gap. Your senses adapt to this challenge. Depth perception becomes crucial. If your eyes are placed more toward the front of your head rather than out to the sides, the overlapping fields of vision create a better sense of distance. That means fewer misjudged jumps, fewer falls, and more successful foraging trips. The world gains a new dimension of detail. Branches are no longer just shapes. They are precise coordinates that your brain measures and times without conscious thought. Your hands become your primary tools, not just for walking, but for exploring. You feel the texture of bark, the softness of moss, the firmness of a fruit, long before your mouth gets involved. Fingers trace surfaces, test strength, and search for tiny movements that might reveal hidden insects. Grip is not just about holding on, it is about investigating. This shift toward manual exploration is one of the quiet but important steps on the road toward more complex brains and behaviors. Life in the canopy also changes your relationship with food. On the ground, you relied heavily on insects, seeds, and roots. Up here, fruits and young leaves play a larger role. Fruits are rich in energy and often brightly colored, hanging like small lanterns among the branches. They attract not only mammals, but birds and other animals as well. Competition can be intense. You must learn which trees fruit at which times, remembering routes through the forest that lead you from one food source to the next. This is where memory starts to matter. You are no longer simply responding to what is directly in front of you. You are planning small journeys, anticipating where food will be based on your experience of the past few days and weeks. Perhaps there is a particular tree that always offers a cluster of berries near the end of the rainy season, or a certain branch where insects tend to gather at dusk. Your brain begins to store these patterns, building a personalized mental map of the canopy. The social side of life changes as well. In the dense forest floor, you may have had limited visibility and relatively short lines of sight. In the trees, you can often see further in certain directions. You may spot another member of your species moving along a neighboring branch, or hear their calls echoing between trunks. Some of these early tree-dwelling mammals live solitary lives, only coming together to breed or share a particularly rich feeding site. Others begin to form small groups, loose bands that move together through the canopy. Group living brings new advantages and new complications. More eyes mean more warning when a predator is near. Shared knowledge means younger individuals can learn good routes and safe sleeping spots faster. On the other hand, you must now negotiate access to food, mates, and resting branches with your companions. Communication becomes more important. Vocal calls may grow slightly more varied, used to signal danger, location, or mild frustration when someone else steals your fruit. Facial expressions, body posture, and touch start to carry meaning. A friendly grooming session on a wide branch at the end of the day is not just about removing parasites. It is also about building trust and reinforcing bonds. From our modern perspective, we can see the outlines of primate behavior beginning here. Hands that manipulate, eyes that judge distance, brains that remember routes, and social structures that rely on cooperation and communication. None of this would feel as sophisticated as a modern monkey troop, but the foundations are being laid quietly among the leaves. The environment itself shapes these behaviors. The early Cenozoic climate is warmer than what we experience today. Tropical and subtropical forests stretch far across the continents, reaching higher latitudes than our current maps would predict. This creates long corridors of habitat where tree-dwelling mammals can spread and diversify. As some regions become slightly drier or cooler over time, certain populations are pushed to adapt further, developing new strategies for movement and feeding. Occasionally, storms roll through the forest. Strong winds snap branches, heavy rain floods lower areas, and lightning scars the bark of tall trees. For a canopy dweller, a storm is both a danger and an opportunity. Fallen limbs create new pathways. Uprooted trees open gaps in the canopy where sunlight reaches the forest floor, encouraging fresh growth. New plants sprout, insects move in, and within a few years, what was once a disaster becomes a rich feeding ground. From your point of view, as a small tree mammal, your life is still dominated by simple routines. Wake, groom, travel, feed, avoid predators, rest, repeat. You do not know that your limb proportions, your eye placement, your preference for group living, and your interest in exploring your surroundings will one day be echoed in much larger, much stranger creatures that walk on two legs and build houses instead of nests. If we pause for a moment and look at this from a more reflective angle, there is something quite moving about it. The things we take for granted in ourselves, such as the ability to reach out, grab an object, rotate it, inspect it, and decide what to do with it, have roots here. The comfort we feel in social groups, the urge to share food or groom a loved one, the habit of navigating spaces using both memory and vision, all have analogues in these early primate-like mammals. Yet importantly, this was not a story of destiny. The forest was full of other mammals following entirely different paths. Some were refining the art of digging, others were growing heavier and more grounded, preparing for life on open plains that would develop later. Some were testing out semi-aquatic lifestyles. At the time, no one would have pointed at the little tree mammal and said, "This one is going to be special." Evolution does not attach little labels that say future human ancestor to specific branches. Still, the canopy did something important for cognition. It rewarded animals that could judge risk, remember complex routes, and manage social interactions in three-dimensional space. Brains that could handle those tasks gained an advantage. Over many generations, natural selection quietly encouraged slightly better problem-solving, slightly sharper attention, and slightly more nuanced social awareness. You can imagine sitting quietly on a sturdy branch in this ancient forest, legs dangling, just watching. A small group of tree-dwelling mammals moves along a feeding route, stopping here and there to nibble fruits or pick insects from bark. One juvenile misjudges a jump, scrambles desperately, and manages to catch a lower branch, learning something it will never describe in words, but will remember in muscle and instinct. Another reaches out to touch a new plant, sniffing it cautiously before deciding whether to bite. A mother keeps her young close, guiding them to easier paths and safer perches. The light softens as day moves toward evening. Bird calls change, insects start to sing, and the forest shifts into its twilight rhythm. The mammals find sleeping spots, some in tree hollows, some nestled in forked branches. They curl into themselves or into each other, fur pressed against fur, breath slowly evening out. High above the forest floor, they sleep in a world held together by wood, leaves, and the faint glow of early starlight. This is what life in the canopy meant for our mammal ancestors. Not a dramatic leap toward humanity, but a gradual refinement of bodies and behaviors that made certain kinds of thinking and moving more useful. Hands learned to hold. Eyes learned to measure. Minds learned to remember. Social groups became more than just shared space. They became shared experience. In the next chapter, we will climb back down from the trees and take a broader tour again, following the mammals who chose very different directions. We will visit those that returned to the water, those that took to open plains, and those that developed more specialized predator roles, all within this same busy age of mammals. For now, you can hold on to the image of a small creature settled against a warm branch, tail curled, breathing slow, surrounded by a forest that has no idea it is quietly growing the first outlines of our own story. Chapter 6. Back to the water, out on the plains. We have spent some time in the trees, watching our mammal relatives learn how to balance, grasp, and glide their way through the canopy. Now it is time to climb back down and look outward again. The early Cenozoic is not a one-environment story. While some mammals are perfecting tree life, others are quietly reinventing what it means to live on land and in water. Imagine the world a few tens of millions of years after the dinosaur extinction. Forests still cover vast regions, but they are no longer the only stage in town. In some places, the trees thin out into more open woodlands. In others, river systems snake across wide floodplains, creating wetlands, deltas, and shallow coastal regions. These shifting landscapes present new opportunities, and the mammals are paying attention. Let us start at the water's edge. Picture a broad, slow-moving river under a warm, heavy sky. The banks are lined with vegetation, reeds, and shrubs that lean over the water, dropping leaves onto the surface. Small fish ripple just under the light, insects skim across, and somewhere nearby, a crocodile-shaped reptile lurks in the shallows. This is not a place for careless drinkers. At first, mammals come here the way many animals do. They arrive cautiously, sniffing for danger, ears flicking at every sound. They drink, perhaps splash a little, then retreat to safer ground. Over time, a few of them begin to linger. Maybe they discover that the water is full of edible things, soft-bodied invertebrates, crustaceans, small fish that can be scooped up with a quick snap of the jaws. If you focus on one of these slightly more curious mammals, you can see the beginnings of a shift. Its limbs are strong enough to push through mud. Its fur traps a layer of air close to the skin, giving a bit of insulation in cool water. It starts by paddling in shallow pools, then wades deeper, body half submerged. Food is plentiful here and competition is lower than on the crowded forest floor. That is often how big evolutionary changes begin, not with a dramatic leap, but with small repeated advantages. Generation after generation, traits that make swimming easier become more common in these semi-aquatic lineages. Bodies elongate slightly. Tails strengthen, becoming better at steering. Limbs can flatten a bit, acting like paddles rather than just legs. Eyes and nostrils might shift position so that the animal can watch the world, while most of its body remains underwater. One day, many millions of years later, some of these descendants will live almost entirely in the water, evolving into early whales that chase fish in open seas. But at this stage, they are more like adventurous shoreline mammals, wading and paddling where others only drink. Now step away from the river and look further inland. Here, in areas where the climate is a little drier, or the soil composition is different, forests thin into more open habitats. These are not the classic endless grasslands of much later eras yet, but they are a step in that direction. You might see clusters of trees separated by shrubs, low vegetation, and patches of early grasses. The view is wider, the sky feels bigger, and the sense of exposure is stronger. This is where another kind of mammalian experiment is underway. Some species are beginning to specialize in life on the ground over longer distances. Imagine a medium-sized herbivorous mammal moving across this more open landscape. Its legs are a bit longer than those of its forest-dwelling cousins. Its body is balanced for steady, energy-efficient walking. It spends much of its day with its head down, cropping plants. Leaves, shoots, and early grasses become its main source of energy. Its teeth are no longer just general-purpose crunching tools. They are broad and ridged, better suited for grinding fibrous plant material. In evolution, food and teeth tend to be close friends. A shift in one almost always leads to a shift in the other. As plant eaters adapt to tougher, more abrasive diets, their dental patterns change, and with them their skull shapes, jaw muscles, and even the way they hold their heads. Eating is serious business. Get it wrong, and you do not last long. Being out in the open brings a new set of risks. Forest mammals can often rely on dense vegetation to hide. Here cover is patchier. Predators can see you from further away, but you can see them too. This arms race drives changes in both groups. Prey animals evolve better senses, faster acceleration, and group living that allows them to keep more eyes on the surroundings. Predators respond with their own improvements in speed, stealth, and strategy. Over time, some mammal species become true runners. Their limbs lengthen further, joints refine, and body mass settles into shapes that can handle sudden sprints or long-distance travel. They are not yet modern antelopes or horses, but the basic outline of cursorial or running-adapted mammals is emerging. If you return to your gentle aerial view of this early Cenozoic world, you can now see a more layered pattern. Forests that still hum with tree dwellers and small undergrowth mammals. Wetlands where semi-aquatic explorers test out their paddling skills. Open woodlands where ground-living herbivores graze, and predators watch from a distance. It feels like the world has gained more variety in its texture, more types of spaces for life to inhabit. All of this is happening under a climate that is generally warm and stable, at least for now. There are fluctuations, of course, but overall the early Cenozoic Earth often resembles a giant greenhouse, rich in plant growth and humidity. This warmth provides a lot of energy to the system. Plants can grow quickly, which supports large communities of herbivores, which in turn support diverse carnivores and scavengers. For our mammal ancestors, this is a time of exploration. Some remain small and flexible generalists, capable of fitting into whatever niche is available. Others begin to commit more strongly to particular lifestyles. The more they specialize, the less easily they can move back if conditions change. That is the gamble of evolution. Specialization can be incredibly successful until it is not. Yet from our perspective, millions of years later, this diversity is exactly what we find so fascinating. There's something quietly impressive about watching an entire class of animals try out different answers to the same basic questions. How do you find food? How do you avoid danger? How do you raise the next generation? Do you run, climb, swim, burrow, glide, or some combination of all of these? For now, hold in your mind a broad view of the early Cenozoic. Rivers glinting through green valleys, open patches of land where herds graze, forests sheltering climbers and foragers, and somewhere between all of them, the splash of a mammal who has decided that getting a little wet is worth the reward waiting just under the surface. Chapter 7. A Greenhouse World. So far, we have talked mostly about the animals themselves, their bodies, their behaviors, their daily struggles, and quiet victories. Now it is time to look up and around at the world they are living in. Because to really understand our mammal ancestors, we need to understand the stage on which their story played out. The early Cenozoic was, for much of its span, a greenhouse world. That does not mean it was uniformly steaming hot everywhere all the time, but the overall climate was significantly warmer than what we experience on Earth today. Think fewer permanent ice caps, more extended warm zones, and long stretches of time where tropical and subtropical conditions reach much closer to the poles. Imagine looking at a map of the planet from this time. Continents are arranged differently from modern configurations, but what stands out is the spread of warm, humid environments. Forests extend much further north and south than they do now. Regions that are cool, temperate today might have been home to dense, almost jungle-like vegetation. From a mammal's point of view, this has a number of consequences. First, warm temperatures and high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere support rapid plant growth. When plants thrive, herbivores have more to eat. When herbivores thrive, carnivores have a more reliable food supply. A greenhouse climate within reasonable limits can be very good for biodiversity. It provides the energy that fuels complex ecosystems. Second, the lack of large permanent ice sheets means that sea levels are relatively high. Coastlines are different. Shallow seas cover areas that are now exposed land, and island chains form where land barely peaks above the water. These shifting edges between land and sea create all sorts of interesting habitats, from mangrove-like wetlands to coastal plains and estuaries. Semi-aquatic mammals, coastal foragers, and early marine lineages exploit these spaces. Third, warm oceans influence weather patterns. With more heat available, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. This means heavier rainfall in some regions, supporting lush forests, and longer dry seasons in others, favoring more open woodlands. The result is a patchwork of environments. A valley full of dense trees might sit next to a plateau of more open vegetation, which in turn transitions into wetlands along a river system. This environmental variety is exactly what allows mammals to spread into diverse niches. Of course, a greenhouse world is not perfectly stable. Throughout the early Cenozoic, there are periods where the climate shifts more rapidly. One particularly notable event is a brief but intense spike in global temperatures known as a thermal maximum. During this kind of event, massive amounts of carbon enter the atmosphere and oceans, probably from sources like volcanic activity, changes in ocean circulation, or the release of methane from seafloor deposits. The result is a sudden warming that reshapes environments over geologically short timescales. For mammals living through such changes, the experience is mixed. In cooler regions, a warming climate might open up new, previously marginal habitats. In already hot regions, additional warming can push conditions toward the edge of what larger animals can tolerate. Plants shift their ranges, some species decline, others expand, and the animals that depend on them must either follow, adapt, or disappear. If you imagine being one of our mammal ancestors during one of these warming pulses, you would not experience it as an abstract number on a graph. You would feel it in the length of the dry season, the timing of fruiting trees, the depth of rivers, and the presence or absence of familiar plants along your foraging routes. A favorite feeding patch might wither earlier in the year. A stream that once ran year-round might now dry up for a month or two. Those changes add up to differences in survival and reproduction. Overall, though, the long span of the early Cenozoic greenhouse period provides a relatively favorable backdrop for mammalian diversification. Warmth and plant growth allow for experiments in body size and lifestyle. Some lineages grow larger, testing the limits of what a mammal can become in a world without dinosaur competition. Others refine small, specialized roles, taking advantage of microhabitats in forests, wetlands, or rocky regions. Another important factor is the slow, steady movement of the continents. As plates drift, oceans open and close, mountain ranges rise, and land bridges appear or vanish. These changes can connect previously isolated populations or separate once continuous ones. When groups become isolated, evolution often pushes them in different directions. A mammal species that was once uniform across a wide region may split into several distinct forms, each adapted to its local conditions. You can think of it like shuffling and reshuffling the game board. Now and then, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or more gradual geological processes add sudden twists. Ash clouds darken skies, cooling temperatures temporarily. New mountain chains alter rainfall patterns, creating rain shadows on one side and increased moisture on the other. Sea level changes flood low-lying areas or expose new coastal plains. Each shift creates winners and losers among the existing species. Despite all this complexity, there is a kind of overarching calm to this period when we compare it to the chaos of the extinction that ushered it in. There are no global collapses on the scale of the end Cretaceous event. Instead, there are pulses of change, followed by periods where ecosystems stabilize and life settles into new configurations. From the perspective of our long-form, relaxing journey, this greenhouse Earth is a richly textured setting. If you close your eyes and picture it, you might see endless corridors of forest broken by occasional clearings and river valleys. You might picture large mammals browsing on broad leaves, smaller ones scampering along branches and vines, and a background chorus of insects and birds. The air smells strongly of vegetation, damp soil, and the occasional hint of volcanic gases in tectonically active regions. It is also a world that reminds us that climate and life are deeply intertwined. The activities of organisms, especially plants, influence atmospheric composition. At the same time, the composition of the atmosphere shapes the conditions in which those organisms live. Over very long timescales, this feedback loop helps maintain a planet that can support liquid water and complex life, even while it swings through different states like icehouse and greenhouse phases. As our mammal ancestors move through this world, their bodies and behaviors are constantly being tuned by these background conditions. Warmth supports active, warm-blooded animals with high metabolisms. Abundant plant life allows for large herbivores and, in turn, large carnivores. Varied habitats encourage different specializations and keep the evolutionary experiments running. As you imagine the forest settling into night, with our ancestor asleep in its burrow, you can let the details blur slightly. The shapes of plants, the sounds of distant animals, the warmth of the air, all blending into a soft background. Somewhere within that background, a line of mammals continues, unbroken, through generations. That line will bend, branch, and twist through primates, apes, and eventually humans. But at its core, it will always be made of days like this. For now, we leave our ancestor resting in the dark, breathing quietly, heart beating in rhythm with a world that has no idea what will eventually grow from its small, determined life. Thank you for listening, and we hope you learned something interesting about our little ancestors.